I had worked at Evergreen Gardens Care Home for nearly 2 decades, 20 years of loyalty, kindness, and slow but steady daily devotion. My name is Frank Williams. I'm 68, walked with a limp after a fall 10 years ago, and need a cane to get from the parking lot into the hall. But inside, I still have energy, experience, and heart. It began on a humid Monday morning in early July. I arrived at my usual 6:45 a.m. shift, cane in hand, ready to greet the residents with their coffee, snacks, and gentle smiles. I had memorized their likes, dislikes, and mid-morning moods. To them, I was more than a care assistant. I was a friend, a confidant, even a grandfather figure. The building hummed with early chatter. Staff arrived. Hallways smelled of bleach and breakfast. I greeted everyone. Nobody seemed off until I reached the manager's office, her red nameplate on the door, reading Miranda Blake, supervisor. Inside sat Miranda, 35 years older than me, towering over a neat desk. Her eyes were cold behind designer glasses. She flipped through papers and didn't even look up when I knocked. "Frank, come in," she said curtly. My heart sank. She rarely called me to her office. Usually she waved or nodded across the hallway. I walked in slowly, fearing the worst. She slid a folder across her desk. "Start cleaning out your locker today. You're terminated." "Effective immediately." I blinked. "Terminated? For what reason?" Miranda leaned back. She tapped her perfectly polished nails. "You're underperforming. Employees have complained. You're slow. You're too old. Honestly, Frank, useless." A hollow laugh escaped me. "I've never missed a shift, not even when I broke my leg." She smiled. "Broken leg doesn't matter in HR's eyes. Our insurance didn't like it. And with more mobile staff available, your costs outweigh your output." Shock reverberated in my chest. The residents saw me as dependable. Staff called me mentor. Yet here Miranda was discarding me like yesterday's newspaper. That evening, word spread across the building. Residents whispered, stunned. Colleagues glanced uneasily. No one knew what to say. I packed my screwdriver, my favorite name badge, and a thin folder of staff discounts, my only personal item besides years of memory. I walked out the door slowly, cane clicking on the linoleum, hearing the silence behind me. At home that night, my wife, Margaret, stared as I placed my uniform in its spot. She gently touched my arm. "Frank, we'll be okay. You've done your best." I nodded, tears welling. I never thought loyalty meant so little to some. The next day, I called my daughter, Sarah, a lawyer in Denver. Her voice brightened with concern. She urged me to write everything down: dates, conversations, witnesses, and prepare for retaliation. She reminded me about age and disability protections under federal and state law. My mind raced. I never imagined having to lawyer up because of sincere service. I also heard from coworkers who wanted to support me, but feared job loss. One aide, Lisa, sent a message. "She made me clean up after her mistakes today. If I talk, I'll be next." Another, Marcus, whispered. "She joked that you'd just stay home and collect my shift." By Friday, my phone rang with requests. A local aging advocate group wanted my story anonymized for their newsletter. 2 residents begged for a meeting to testify. Desperate loyalty kicked in. Residents were more attached to me than I realized. But Miranda doubled down. She blocked access to the resident roster. She erased my paycheck from HR's portal. She told staff, "Frank resigned voluntarily." That lie triggered me more than her insult. I wasn't going quietly. I called a workplace rights hotline. A legal representative said the way she phrased it, "Useless. Firing a disabled worker, insisting he resigned constitutes age and disability discrimination." I was shaken but determined. As weekend approached, an email dropped into my inbox from a neighbor I'd helped fix her garden. She forwarded a local news tip. "Evergreen Gardens firing longtime disabled worker without explanation." Made me realize my story wasn't just mine anymore. By Sunday evening, my daughter and I sat at the kitchen table. She looked at me gently. "Dad, you may feel old, but you're stronger than she ever knew. You'll file a complaint. You'll seek justice." Then she paused. "Your story might help others, too." Something ignited in me. I refused to be invisible. I refused to be erased. And I refused to let someone call me useless. What Miranda hadn't counted on. The community I built inside those halls of the residents, co-workers, supportive families. They would speak, and they would make sure one cruel mistake became a reckoning she'd regret. Monday morning arrived without my alarm clock buzzing. After 20 years of 5:45 a.m. starts, My body still stirred on autopilot, but instead of donning my uniform and tying my orthopedic shoes, I just sat at the breakfast table, staring at a lukewarm cup of coffee. Margaret placed her hand on mine and said, "You've never taken a day off in your life, so maybe, today, take one on purpose." I nodded, but I wasn't going to rest. Not really, because something in me had changed the moment Miranda Blake called me useless. Not hurt, though. That came later. As if 2 decades of warmth, trust, dedication, and patience could be wiped out by one self-important woman in a power suit. By noon, my daughter Sarah had already drafted the beginnings of a formal EEOC complaint. We filed underage discrimination and disability discrimination. She added a section citing Miranda's direct quote, "You're too old. Honestly, Frank, you're useless." And then she attached a copy of the email where HR claimed I'd resigned voluntarily. That was the first nail in the coffin of their lie. Then the phone rang. It was Lisutha, same young aide who once called me her work dad. Her voice trembled. "Frank, they're covering everything up. They're deleting your name from the duty logs. They even told the residents you left because you were tired." Tired, I repeated. I was ready to work another 5 years. She whispered, "I printed out some things before they wiped the system. Staff memos, your perfect attendance records, patient notes. I'll bring them to you. Just don't give up." Later that day, Marcus, another night shift aide, pulled up in his old sedan and handed me a manila envelope. I overheard Miranda laughing. He said, "She joked that she's already got someone younger and cuter lined up. Called UAPR risk. Man, you were the glue that kept things running." The irony, my limp and cane weren't what slowed me down. It was my thoroughness. I checked medication schedules twice. I hand-fed Miss Eleanor when her Parkinson's maid holding a spoon. Impossible. I listened to Mr. Jenkins' war stories for the 100th time because no one else did. My slowness was love. It was safety. It was care. I posted a short message on my neighborhood Facebook group. After 20 years at Evergreen Gardens, I was fired for being too old and too slow. For anyone with family there, please know I never walked away. I was pushed. But I'm not done fighting. Within an hour, the comments started flowing. My mother adored Frank. She called him her angel. He's the reason my father smiled again after Mom passed. Wait, they fired you. What is wrong with that place? The story gained traction. Families messaged me privately, saying they would withdraw their loved ones. Some offered statements for my case. One even worked at a local news station. Then came the moment that made me realize Miranda had no clue what storm she had summoned. Miss Eleanor's daughter, Trish, called. She was furious. "Frank, my mother is refusing meals. Says, it's not the food, it's the silence. You were her comfort." I'm filing a complaint, not just with management, with the State Board of Elder Care. We weren't just fighting an HR mistake now. This was shaping into a pattern of cruelty, one that endangered vulnerable people who had no voice. But I did, and now others were echoing it. That evening, Margaret walked into the room while I was on a Zoom call with Sarah. My wife held a small box. Inside were dozens of notes from former residents and co-workers' birthday cards, thank you notes, even drawings from the grandkids of residents. All things I'd saved over the years. "You should include these," Margaret said softly. "Let them see what useless really looks like." And just like that, the evidence wasn't just legal, it was personal. Human, heartfelt. The kind of thing a jury would never forget. Sarah smiled. "Dad, if they try to settle, they'll lowball you. But if this goes public, if this becomes a story, they'll have to face the one thing they never planned for. Community outrage." That night, for the first time in days, I slept deeply. Not because I had justice, but because I had an army. I was just one man with a cane and a record of loyalty. But Miranda, she was about to learn what happens when you try to erase someone who was loved. By the following Tuesday, it wasn't just angry families or old co-workers who had Miranda's name on their lips. No, something had shifted. The community started buzzing and then boiling. It began quietly. A small segment on Channel 8's local morning news featured a piece titled, "Beloved elderly care worker let go after 20 years. Too old to work." They'd found my Facebook post. The reporter had blurred my last name, but the images were unmistakably me feeding Miss Eleanor pudding, laughing with Mr. Jenkins on the garden bench, and holding up a cake from last year's staff celebration that read, 20 years of Franktastic care. The story didn't go viral in the TikTok sense. It didn't need to, because Evergreen Gardens wasn't in New York or LA. It was in Millbridge, a modest American town where everyone knew someone who'd lived there. By noon, the news station's website had thousands of comments. How dare they treat Frank like this? My grandma lived because of that. Man, we should protest. Name the manager. They deserve to be held accountable. And just like that, the pressure started to mount. I got a call from a woman named Maria Delgado, civil rights attorney and a fierce advocate for age discrimination victims. I've seen a dozen cases like yours, Frank, she said, but rarely with this much community proof. If you're ready to go public, we can sue for wrongful termination, discrimination, emotional distress. I told her I wasn't in it for the money. I was in it to make sure this never happened again. You'll still win, she said, almost laughing. Miranda doesn't know it yet, but she handed us a legal grenade. Meanwhile, Miranda, she was starting to sweat. Her first move was pure Karen panic. She emailed the staff at Evergreen Gardens a long condescending message titled, "Clarifying Misinformation in the Community." In it, she claimed I had stepped down due to health concerns and was honored in a private farewell. It was pure fiction, but what she didn't expect was that someone would leak the email. And oh boy, when Lisa forwarded that message to the local journalist, it became Exhibit A in the court of public opinion. Channel 8 ran a follow-up segment titled, "Exclusive Management Responds with Private Farewell. Former employee says that never happened." Now Miranda's story was starting to crumble. People weren't buying it, especially when a video surfaced on Facebook shot months earlier by a nurse assistant where I was walking the hallway, leaning on my cane, and being hugged by 3 elderly residents. You could clearly hear one of them say, "Don't ever leave us, Frank." The video now had 87,000 views. Outside Evergreen Gardens, a group of 5 protesters stood quietly with signs reading "Age is not a crime and justice for Frank." I didn't organize them. I didn't even know their names. But they showed up anyway. Miranda tried to double down. HR sent out a cease and desist email to all staff warning against sharing confidential workplace details. It backfired. That night, 4 more employees messaged me anonymously. They were done being silent. 2 even offered sworn affidavits describing how Miranda had once mocked another older staffer for using a knee brace. It wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was a pattern. And then came the call that turned everything upside down. "Frank," it was Trish Agenmus, Eleanor's daughter. Her tone was different. "Urgent. You need to know something. Miranda's mother is a resident here. 3rd floor, she's been hiding it." I blinked. "You're sure?" "Positive. Her name is Helen Blake. Same nose, same voice. Staff whispers about it, but Miranda made everyone sign NDA." I leaned back in my chair, stunned. So the woman who thinks people like me don't belong here is depending on people like me to care for her mother? Trish exhaled. Exactly. The irony burned. But it also clarified everything. Miranda wasn't just arrogant, she was a hypocrite of the worst kind. She wanted compassion for her own family, while discarding it for everyone else's. By Friday, Maria had filed a formal lawsuit. The paperwork hit Miranda's desk that afternoon, just as another round of news trucks parked outside the facility. We had testimonies, statements, records, and public support. And Miranda, for all her smug bravado, she was starting to vanish, canceling meetings, dodging reporters, hiding behind HR walls. She thought she could erase me quietly. Now, she was the one being watched. The lawsuit hit harder than Miranda ever anticipated. Her attorney tried to do damage control, but it was too late. The documents we filed weren't just dry legal papers, they were a 15-page declaration of how Evergreen Gardens had systematically mistreated older employees under Miranda's leadership. Signed statements, HR emails, scheduling records, photos, internal messages. Our evidence was airtight, and the cherry on top, multiple witnesses prepared to testify about how I'd been called a relic behind closed doors. But what really rattled Miranda, the public wasn't letting it go. On Monday morning, a peaceful protest turned into a town-wide rally. Over 70 people, many of them senior citizens, stood in front of Evergreen Gardens with signs, banners, and even walkers painted with "Justice for Frank" stickers. Someone had even made t-shirts with my face on them, captioned, "Not useless, essential." It would have been funny if it weren't so heartbreaking. These weren't just strangers, they were residents' families. People who'd seen me help their parents eat, bathe, laugh, and survive. People who knew I didn't deserve this. By Wednesday, 3 major local newspapers had run front-page stories about the scandal. And with pressure mounting, The state's Department of Labor opened an investigation into Miranda's employment practices. It wasn't just a civil matter anymore. It had gone official. Miranda went into full defense mode. First, she tried to deflect, saying my firing was due to performance issues. But when asked to provide any formal write-ups or documentation, she failed because they didn't exist. Not one complaint, not one warning, nothing. Next, she tried to stage a PR stunt announcing Evergreen Gardens would honor community seniors with a ribbon-cutting event and free lunch for families. She hoped it would make people forget. It backfired spectacularly. Only 4 people showed up. 3 of them were reporters. One was a protester who snuck in wearing a fake mustache and filmed the whole awkward affair on TikTok. The video was titled, "Karen Director Tries to Senior Wash Her Bad PR, No One Buys It." And through it all, Miranda's own mother Helen Blake was still residing quietly on the 3rd floor of Evergreen Gardens. Understaffed, she didn't realize her daughter had mocked and mistreated. The irony was brutal. One of the nurses, who'd been working there longer than Miranda had even been in management, told me something that nearly stopped my heart. "Helen asks about you sometimes. She doesn't know what happened, just keeps saying she misses the man who used to bring her orange juice and listen to her stories about her cats." I had to sit down when I heard that. Miranda might have fired me, humiliated me, and tried to erase me, but the people who mattered, the ones we actually served every day, they remembered, they cared, and in the end, that's what made all the difference. The court date was set. I wasn't nervous, I was ready. Maria and I walked in together, flanked by supporters. Evergreen Gardens sent a lawyer, but Miranda showed up late, wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying a folder full of excuses. The judge listened, carefully, patiently. He read through every page of the complaint and supporting documents, and when he looked up from the bench, his expression told me everything. He was not amused. In his ruling, he called Miranda's actions discriminatory and unbecoming of a director entrusted with vulnerable individuals. He ordered Evergreen Gardens to pay damages, rehire me with full back pay, issue a public apology, and submit to a 1-year compliance audit by the state. But I declined the job offer. I didn't want to go back, not to that version of Evergreen Gardens. Instead, I suggested something different, that they establish a scholarship program in my name to train young caregivers and create a job placement path for older individuals who still wanted to serve, to give second chances to people like me who might have been counted out, but weren't done yet. They agreed. Miranda, however, she was forced to resign, effective immediately. Her public apology aired live on local news. Her tone was flat, but her face was red. You could see the defeat in her eyes. That cold superiority from before. Gone. I should have felt satisfaction. And I did. But more than anything, I walked out of the courthouse to applause. Neighbors, former co-workers, residents, families, cheering and clapping. A few elderly folks even held up "Go Frank" signs like it was a graduation party. One woman, who I'd helped bathe after her hip surgery 3 years ago, came up and hugged me. "Thank you," she said, her voice cracking, "for standing up not just for yourself, but for all of us. That was the real reward." And while Miranda tried to quietly disappear from the public eye, her name would forever be attached to a cautionary tale, a reminder that dignity doesn't expire, and respect has no age limit. I never thought that losing my job would lead to the most meaningful chapter of my life. But funny how life works when you stop running from your pain and start building something from it instead. It started small. I got a call from a local community college not long after the settlement. They'd heard about the court case and the new scholarship program Evergreen Gardens was funding. The school wanted someone to guest lecture their nursing and students, someone with real-world wisdom and lived experience. They wanted me. At first I thought it was a joke. I wasn't a teacher. I wasn't even a college graduate. But the coordinator smiled and said, "You've done more for people than any textbook ever could. We want them to learn from you." So I went, nervous, wearing my best pressed shirt and old brown shoes. And I walked into a room full of 20. I took a breath, looked around, and started simply. "My name's Frank, and I've changed more diapers and bedpans than any of you can count. But this is a job about the heart. If you don't have that, none of the rest matters." You could have heard a pin drop. That lecture turned into a weekly class, then 2 classes. Then the school invited me to help develop curriculum for senior care empathy training. Eventually, they gave me an honorary certificate and named the classroom wing after the program we built, the Frank Thompson Care and Dignity Initiative. It didn't end there. Local businesses started reaching out, asking how they could hire more older workers. I began speaking at town halls, retirement centers, Even Job Fair's talking about how people over 60 weren't broken, or useless, or a burden. They were untapped gold mines of strength, loyalty, and wisdom. One day I got a letter from someone I never expected, Helen Blake, Miranda's mother. Her handwriting was shaky, but clear. She thanked me, said she'd heard everything that had happened after I was let go, that she was sorry, that her daughter had lost sight of the values she'd once taught her. She ended it with 5 words that made my throat tighten. You mattered. You still do. It reminded me that sometimes, the ones who raise us don't always recognize the monsters we become. But even in the middle of Miranda's destruction, her mother saw the truth and spoke it out loud. That one letter, I keep it in my wallet. Meanwhile, Miranda, last I heard, she moved states away. Quietly, no fanfare, no LinkedIn updates. A few people said she was trying to start fresh, maybe go into consulting. But word travels fast. Every employer Googles you these days, and the search results next to her name weren't pretty. A 3-part headline series, a court document, and a video of her humiliating apology. But I don't need to keep tabs. Karma handles that for me. What matters is what came next, what we built after the storm. Maria and I finally took that trip we always talked about, Yellowstone in the spring. We watched elk graze under a sky so big it swallowed our worries, and we talked about legacy, about how, if nothing else, at least we'd taught others to stand up with grace when pushed down with cruelty, and that sometimes the cruelest cuts are what let the light in. Now, every month, I get updates from young caregivers in the program. Some send photos with the patients they've grown close to. Some send thank you cards. One girl wrote, I used to think old people were just sad stories waiting to end. Now I know they're full novels, living ones, and I get to help write the next chapters. That one made me cry. The man Miranda tried to erase. Yes, now there isn't over 200 new caregivers walk into work every week believing in the dignity of their elders. That's something even Miranda couldn't undo. So the next time someone calls you too old, too slow, or too broken to matter, because if there's one thing I've learned, they always regret it. Eventually. And if they don't, the world has a way of reminding them. Loudly.